I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to Commissioner Gooder and Aboriginal people present here today. And thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today. And I thought that the best way forward for me today was to offer some thoughts about the way forward in terms of social security, income support and a good society, based on my experience of working at the Welfare Rights Centre over the last 4.5 years. We deal with social security law on a rights-based approach with advocacy for people who are living on very low incomes, sometimes in extreme poverty, but basically reliant on social security. And also one of the things that I've experienced in the time that I've been at the Welfare Rights Centre and spokesperson for our national peak body, the National Welfare Rights Network, is this the incongruence that people feel between the word welfare and the word rights. It's almost that they can't have the two words together, and they find just the title confronting, and that what we might have to say is something that's therefore not legitimate. As though people who are needing income support and social security in Australia, therefore, by correlation, don't have any rights. So I think that's been an interesting experience for me, and also the level of subjugation of the people when they are reliant on social security and therefore their lives are completely surveilled. That was a really shocking experience for me to experience, where people just felt that they had absolutely no power in their lives whatsoever. So the thoughts that I have about rebuilding the left or renewal of the left or where we would go in the future are basically about the issues of income support, social security, to the tax and transfer system. How do we collect and how do we distribute? How do we redistribute? And how do we say to the people that there's a collective amount of money that we have that needs to be redistributed without being slammed down, either in audiences across the nation or through the media. So those are the things that I find quite confronting. Even the notion that social security is actually part of the taxation system is confronting to people. For example, if you get tax concessions through the superannuation system, or you can set up private trusts and disperse money without having to pay as much income tax, that you're actually receiving, through that tax concession, a form of social security. The fact that we have to talk about the tax system separately from the social security system, I think, is a problem. We need to talk about that collectively. And talking about the issue of the Welfare Rights Centre, I spent some time thinking about, well, is one of the ways forward that we need to reclaim the word welfare, for that reason that I spoke to you about, that it is actually a good term. I acknowledge for Aboriginal people it hasn't always been a good term, but that the idea of looking after others, that welfare, social welfare is a good term. And I spent some time on that, but I came to the conclusion that there's actually a bigger issue underlying that we really need to reclaim the notion of what government is in a democracy, that the role of government itself is under attack, and that in fact is the bigger picture, higher level area that we need to work on. And you will have all heard, of course, of the push of the notion of the big society that's been coming out of the UK, but the notion that we will have smaller and smaller government, and that somehow those gaps will be filled through the community sector or through families or through individuals and volunteers and volunteerism, a right-wing notion of smaller government and the distribution of government money to private enterprise. I think of big society in terms of big tobacco, big dirt, big pharma. That's the same type of notion, I think. And we've seen a similar thing now from the Centre of Independent Studies in Australia, who have recently put forward a paper called Target 30 towards smaller government and future prosperity, as though the notion of smaller government and prosperity necessarily have to go hand in hand. So thinking about the role of government, then you can see the struggle that this current Labor government has had to maintain space for government at all. And we've seen that in many battles, the battle over the mining tax, the recent battle over superannuation, and the very minor changes to the superannuation system that brought forward the most vigorous and vociferous of screams from the wealthy. And the accommodation that you can see when we saw John Brogden, former coalition leader in New South Wales, but now head of the Financial Council, set up to talk on behalf of the retail superannuation funds. acknowledging that he was quite happy with those changes and that therefore they wouldn't run their major advertising campaign that we thought of. So the smaller, the more difficult it has become for government to make decisions in the public interest. And having said that, I think that this government has made some very good decisions in the area of the tax and transfer system. Calling to your attention, for example, the historic increase in the age pension. I know that did not happen for people who are unemployed, but people who've worked in the social welfare area that I'm in now have told me of years of going to government to get a $1 a week pay increase for age pensioners. So a $35 per week increase for people on the pension, historic and important. The freezing of the health rebate and some of the changes where there's been a freezing of indexation for family benefits that are being distributed to people at $150,000 of income or more. So there have been some changes by this government to attempt to rein back in the distribution to those who are already privileged. Another change that was a welcome change was where, if you may not know, but in order to get on the unemployment payment in Australia, you have to actually have expended nearly all of your income. And in fact, a single person could only have liquid assets of $2,500. So what actually happens usually is someone is retrenched and they get a very modest retrenchment package, perhaps $40,000. And if they have a mortgage, their immediate instinct is to put it on the mortgage, or they have debts that they have to pay and so forth. And what happens then is they're actually expected to have lived on that and expended that before they can get onto the unemployment benefit. Why I'm telling you that is that this government did in fact double the amount that you can have in savings before you go onto the unemployment payment. So there's been some changes at the edges. But the screams of the wealthy are always heard so much more than the screams of the poor. And one of the issues I wanted to draw to your attention, I'm sure you perhaps already know about it, was at the time that the Prime Minister was making her speech about misogyny in the Parliament, at the same time going through the Parliament and passing that very day was the bill that reduced the payments for people who are on the single parenting payment once their child turned 8. So what we saw there was a form of institutionalised misogyny, where 95% of those people are women, 60% of them were already working. So it was not about getting people into the workforce, it was about cutting the budget. And the savings that were made on the backs of the single parents, I think it was $750 million over the 4-year period. That they made about half of that by the small superannuation changes that they made. Now those changes, the superannuation changes, are only affecting 16,000 people that Craig Edison would say were fabulously wealthy. So we got a half of that from those 16,000 people, and we've got 60 to 80,000 single parents, one group of whom were hurt in the 2005 changes under the Howard government, the second group now hurt under the changes of the Labor government. So the issues, I think, of the deserving and the undeserving poor haven't gone away for us, and that is, in terms of the work that we're doing, the most difficult struggles. And when I bring it down and crystallise it to its main point, in terms of the work I'm dealing with in social security, 2 minutes, I think that we have to concentrate on, at the bigger level, the role of government, democracy, and what a government does. And the second issue at the smaller level is the New Start allowance for unemployed people and the minimum wage. We have to lift those payments, because those who are already earning and already privileged will always look after themselves, as we know. If we can lift the New Start allowance and the minimum wage, we can make a difference, I think, across the whole of the nation. And I just wanted to draw your attention, I've got a number of slides that I won't worry about, but this particular slide was produced by Matt Cowgill from the ACTU. Some of you may have seen it before, but what it shows you, the flat line at the bottom just above the $10,000 is in fact the New Start allowance for unemployed people. And knowing, of course, that where people who are unemployed are kept in extreme poverty, that becomes a discipline to the workers who are on the lowest wages in the workforce. One of the reasons for such a low New Start allowance is about disciplining, in my view, of unions and also of workers. But look at the flat lining of the New Start allowance, where the last real increase in the New Start allowance was actually the Keating government, I think $1 or a couple of dollars. The next line is the Henderson poverty line, which is the little dots. The next line after that is the 60% of median poverty line. Now that's the line that the UN uses as its regular notion of what would be living in poverty. And then you can see the minimum wage also pretty much flatlining above. So for me, in terms of our energies, I would be targeting and am targeting in the work that I do, the increase in the New Start allowance and also the increase in the minimum wage, both of which are very important. Then we come to the use of language in the public domain, and I know I've got about a minute maybe, yeah. These words about welfare dependency, the entitlement mentality, the delegitimizing of social security rights by using those words, we need to challenge them. And then the conditionality, and Commissioner Good has already talked about income management, where we say that we want people to engage, to participate, to work, and then we do the most counterproductive thing we can do, which is take away their decision-making capacity entirely and micromanage their money. So what we have done is set up a mini bureaucracy to micromanage people's money, some of whom are Aboriginal, and now by extent that has also now extended to people living on low incomes in a number of communities across Australia. And you can see with the incoming government, if it is the incoming government, who has been talking of, where we've had Tony Abbott talking about limiting social security payments, and obviously then we have to fear that we're moving into a world where food stamps might be the next step. So to backtrack, the role of government and what its actual role is, rather than a debate about whether it should be small or large. I don't think that's the debate. The debate is what is government set up to do and what is its proper terrain. And then within that, I would be targeting lifting the New Start allowance and lifting the minimum wage. Thank you very much.